Hey everybody, welcome to the Fired Up with CJ show. We have a special Valentine's Day treat for you. We are going to be talking to the author of this book, Linda Carroll. She is a couples therapist, and the book we're going to be talking about is Love Cycles, the 5 essential stages of lasting love. Now, the interesting thing is I feel very blessed and lucky that I have a very, very wonderful relationship with my husband. And I can literally go through this book and see the 5 stages that we go through because they're very normal stages that a love relationship goes through. So I wanted to talk about that, Linda. And then also, I just want to give a little testament to your book. Are you okay with that?
Yes, that's great.
A high five. The high five about the book is my sister-in-law has asked me, well, how do you guys do it? What do you do? And I've never been able to really explain what we're doing, like why it works, what we're doing, and like literally, what are we doing? I don't know. But when I read your book, it encapsulates a lot of the things that we're doing. It's hard to explain to another person because you don't really know what you're doing.
So what would be a way, how would you describe one thing you're doing?
Well, we do the there are the 5 stages that you talk about in your book. One being the part of the puppy love part, when you're actually merging with the other person and you can see no wrong. And the doubt and denial part was when we were like, wait a second, you're not as perfect and godlike.
And neither am I.
Right. And then no, it's usually like, no, you're not perfect, but I am still.
That's right.
Right. That was more what was like,
yeah, right.
Why can't you be more like me? Right.
Yeah.
Which I think you mentioned a couple times in the book.
The big fight. Why aren't you like me is the argument.
Yeah. And it really was the 6 essential skills that you talked in the book that help us bridge a gap. Like, to kind of recognize, well, you're no angel either.
You know what I think the most important skill is?
Yeah.
Is understanding that love is a feeling and a long-term relationship is a skill set. And that the feeling comes and goes. Everybody fights. Everybody has impossible troubles.
Yeah.
I really believe that. Even people, if people say they don't, I think that they're either lying or they're a delusion. We're all annoying, we're different.
Yeah.
And so everybody goes into the hard places where it's just so difficult to work out stuff. My husband and I have this expression sometimes where we just say everything, like everything is an argument. What do you want to eat? Do you want a dog?
Yeah.
Do you like spring? And then, but if you allow that, just like you allow yourself hard days or you allow winter to be there and you say, we're in kind of a tricky time right now. Let's just be nice to each other and it'll pass. I'm not talking about bearing trouble. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
But sometimes we're really in unison and sometimes we're not.
Yeah.
And if we can allow that to be and not think, oh, we need to get a divorce because we've had 3 bad weeks.
Right.
Then it can move to the next stage. But
Right.
what happens is people get so distressed because we want it to be like our culture teaches us. It's all in the songs and the movies that we're just gaga all the time. When it's not like that, it's like something's bad or wrong.
Right.
But it's not bad or wrong.
Yeah. Well, I think Valentine's Day is in some ways a beautiful expression and a way for us to, to show our love through gifts and all these other things. But I think actually they set up a really dangerous construct because they make us think like, oh, I want that romantic love where my Prince Charming will be there forever. And, and get to that stage that you talk about as one of your 5 cycles, which is the merging stage. We all want to merge, right?
Because it's mediated by wonderful chemicals, dopamine and norepinephrine. It makes us feel so good.
Yeah.
I want to feel so good.
I know. I was surprised when I read that in your book that it's the same chemicals that are stimulated through an addiction. I mean, when we say love is an addiction, it really is. It's not just.
It really is.
Yeah.
The part of the brain that lights up when people are in the new romantic stage of love is the same part that lights up with gambling. Isn't that interesting?
I know. Well, we are gambling, right? At that time.
We are. That's right.
We are.
That's right. It is. It's a big old gamble.
Exactly. All right. Tell us about the other stages. We all know about the merge, and there's not, we all know what that is. Just watch a movie and it's there.
Right.
But
Listen to
you
themselves.
know, there's the doubt and denial, and we start going, oh, that's really you?
Yeah,
And I was
right.
like, I've woken up from my dream state, and I'm like, oh, you're not that great.
Or those things I fell in love with are starting to annoy me.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
another part of that
yeah.
stage.
My husband says I do this thing where we go like this with my nose because I have allergies, and he said, when I first met you, I thought, what is that? You know, like after the shine wore off, it was like, what is that?
What is she
And
doing with her nose? What do you do?
I go like this because I have allergies.
Yeah.
And he said over time, he's like, now I love it. It looks like a little animal. And I'm just like, ah, she's so cute. But you know, at first, it went through like I didn't even notice it to now
What
it's
is wrong with
irritating
her?
me. And now I think it's cute.
That's just, oh, that's good. That's good that he thinks it's cute.
I know. Yeah, because you found it's horrific. All right, so what's the third stage, disillusionment? What's that all about?
Well, you know, the first stage is we're enchanted,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a trance. Everything's
Yes.
perfect.
Yeah.
The third stage, we're disenchanted, and
Mm-hmm.
everything is wrong. It's another kind of trance. Like in stage one, all we see is what's right.
Yes.
And then in the third stage, all we see is what's wrong.
Yeah.
Everything becomes evidence,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
I
Everything.
reach that stage with my husband, and I bet this is pretty common when you go through major transitions in your life, like you get a new job. We had, you know, a baby in our lives, and this is when I hit my disillusionment state where I'm like, what? What's happening here? I don't get it. I don't like it.
But that's one of the big myths is that when couples have babies, the happiness is going to go up and there's
Yeah.
nothing more wonderful in the world, but in fact, it crashes. And it's one of the hardest times in a relationship. And we don't know that, so we think something's wrong.
You know what? I was recalling my ex-boyfriend who said, "Oh yeah, it's like you have couples." He described this as you have a couples that are sitting in the bottom of this abyss, and they're going like, "Come on in, it's awesome. You should do it. It's awesome." And then they jump into the abyss of marriage, and then they're like, "Ha ha!
I got you.
I got you." I think parenting is the same way. You know, you see all those mothers, dear, you know, holding their baby in a loving way, and you know, no, where are the mothers changing diapers when they're like, oh
We
my
haven't
god,
slept
like
in 3 weeks.
exactly bags under their eyes, you know,
Yeah,
running on
yeah,
the car with the baby crying.
yeah. Right, right. And then not to mention sex, you know,
Yes,
with when women have babies,
yeah,
nothing they're all of their desire level. I mean, it's nature's way of
yeah,
trying to make us not have other babies
yeah.
is our focus is on the baby, but their partner,
Right.
their focus is they don't that hasn't happened for them.
Yeah,
So you have a whole different desire discrepancy going
yeah,
on too, and
yeah,
that's not very happy for a lot of
yeah.
people.
It's not. And then there's the once you reach that disillusionment, there's the decision stage, which I wanted to talk more about. Tell us what that is.
That's great. Well, you can't, you know, we just don't stay miserable forever. Most people don't. We have to do something like if and we have these power struggles that go on. I call them infinity loops, and they're the
Mm-hmm.
same ones. And you know, we have the same. My husband and I have had the same fight for 40 years.
Oh yes, I know.
Dishes.
Me
And it's
too.
really vicious. I mean, I'd like to use this program to talk about the way he does dishes to get everybody to agree that I'm right. It's been mean for 40 years, you know,
Yeah,
we laugh about it, but it makes me crazy, you know.
yeah,
And it makes him crazy how I do it.
yeah,
I mean, there's a lot of fights,
yeah,
but that's an ongoing thing. We have those loops. We get so tired of them. We
yeah,
get so tired of the same fight. We get so tired of being stuck in the trance of what's wrong. And I think that the decision is really how do I get out of the pain? And do I
mm,
get out of the pain by leaving the relationship because the problem's all the other person?
mm-hmm.
Do I get out of the pain by staying in the relationship and doing what I call parallel living, where we just give up connection and intimacy, but we have kind of parallel lives? You
Mm-hmm.
know, some people choose that. That's not bad. It's just, you know, you give something big up.
Yeah.
Or do we try to figure out,
Wait, and what you give up is intimacy,
yeah,
right? Just to clear. Okay.
yeah, yeah. Um, or do we figure out how to learn the skills to actually learn how to love? Because
Mm-hmm.
loving's free. That's why it's called
Mm-hmm.
falling in
Mm-hmm.
love. I mean, I did it
Mm-hmm.
at 11, you know. How bright do you have to be? And but learning how to love is a whole different business.
Yeah.
Learning how to love an imperfect person and being an imperfect person, that's a life skill. It goes, that's why the philosophers, what Rilke didn't, he said it takes a lifetime to learn how to love and really love another person
Yeah.
who's annoying, who's not you, who does the dishes wrong, who
Right.
does things that make you feel crazy. To learn to love an imperfect person is really a life art skill. And I think that so the decision is, do we learn how to get to this place of wholehearted loving, which
Right.
is two whole people?
Right.
How
That's
to
and that's the fifth cycle
cycle.
of your love cycles
Yes,
is
yes.
wholehearted loving. And and here's the thing that was interesting when I read that chapter on wholehearted loving. I'm someone who reads a lot of spiritual texts, and I thought, well, isn't this about living? I mean, this is about our living. It's living with another person, but isn't our journey really about learning to love ourselves? Isn't the spiritual journey learning about how to love ourselves and to love others freely? Like that is what our wholehearted living is living, I think.
I people say, what are the skills? And
Yeah.
there's two kinds of skills to
Uh-huh.
get to wholehearted love. One are the skills we all read about, communication skills,
Mm-hmm.
learning to fight fair, to listen, blah, 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 all that. The second set of skills is what I call the spiritual tradition skills,
Mm-hmm.
because to really learn how to love, you've got to practice all those things the wisdom traditions talk about. You have
Mm-hmm.
to practice forgiveness,
Mm-hmm.
you have to practice acceptance, you have to practice kindness, you have to practice those qualities that we all drive each other crazy.
Yeah.
And the forgiveness thing. My husband, for instance, he's not in the room right now, so I can talk about him.
Yeah.
Um, he's totally an open book, and sometimes he's an open book about me, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm very private. Even though I do
Mm-hmm.
interviews and I go on the air and stuff,
Yeah, and you're divulging his secrets at this point, but okay.
I'm selective. And so sometimes he says things about me that I feel like he shouldn't, don't talk about my life. And
Mm-hmm.
and so for him, he doesn't care what I say.
Yeah.
So there's a lot, I can hold a grudge. Remember when you told your brother that 7 years ago,
Yeah.
and you did, I mean, and what I'm really saying is it doesn't have to be major life betrayals. There's a story in the book about a couple where the woman was very private and the man he had a restaurant and he was very, I don't know if you remember, but he was like an open book. It was sort
Yeah.
of based on Tim and I. And she was a poet, very private, very
Mm-hmm.
introverted.
Mm-hmm.
And she got a notice that she was a contender for a contest
Mm-hmm.
nationally. And she told him, and she said, don't tell anybody. Well, he told everyone and came home and they'd made her a cake at the restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
She was so angry she wanted to divorce him. She said,
Mm-hmm.
how could you have betrayed me? He said, what's there to betray? I was so proud of you. They couldn't get it. And my point is that that's just human life. Two different people living together.
Right.
And we've got to get over it. People hold on to their grudges.
Right.
And so part of the spiritual traditions and the qualities is learning how to let things go.
Yeah.
How to, practice acceptance. You're not me. So the skill sets are communication skills, but also the wisdom tradition skills.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that it's a life practice in not just learning how to, the other thing is that we all leave each other.
Yeah.
Whether we leave each other in the decision or we leave each other because one of us dies, it all comes back to our own relationship with ourselves, which is
Right.
what you just said.
Yeah. So I want to go back a little bit back to that decision process, because as you said, there are lots of different venues that we can go, or options. We can actually stay together and live parallel lives, try to figure out how to be wholehearted, or just leave. And a lot of people decide to leave, and I think it's a hard decision to know, because I read your chapters and I thought, okay, when I broke up with someone, what was it that made me break up? And when is it that you say, yes, it's time for me to go? And when is it when you say, no, there's still something in this for me to learn, to grow, for both of us, for me, for them, I'm not sure, but I just need to stick with it. So, and be wholehearted. How do you know? It's a very tricky place to be. How does one know when it's time to go?
I think that there's a difference between reaction and responding. You
Mm-hmm.
know, sometimes people want to get out of the pain and not the relationship. And when they can get out of the pain, they are happy to be in the relationship. Other
Mm.
times, the relationship is really done. I think that it takes a while to know that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that the way we know it, I know this is a really odd answer, but I think we know it because something deep in our belly is very quietly says it's done. And
Mm-hmm.
that it's not in reaction to being mad, to being hurt. You know, some of the best marriages I know have come out of the biggest messes
Mm-hmm.
because people really have to clean up and
Mm-hmm.
they end up redoing, building their relationship from the ground up. But people always ask that question: how do you know when it's time to leave? I don't think it's time to leave when you're mad or when you're stuck, unless you're in danger,
Mm-hmm.
or unless you're with somebody who won't do anything about their situation. You know, one of the things I've read a lot of art. I write a lot. I
Mm-hmm.
write a lot of blogs and I read a lot, and I think that people often talk about time to leave, and they usually there's something like, "Oh, here are the 5 reasons you leave. You're
Mm-hmm.
not in love anymore."
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a stupid reason. Some days I'm not in love, and some days I am.
Mm.
Love is a feeling; it comes and it goes.
Mm.
Or
That's a good point.
you annoy each other.
Right.
Well, sometimes you're going to.
Right.
Some of the reasons that often I read about as evidence that it's time to leave are just because you've left the merge and you're trying to figure out how to be together. So I'm
Interesting.
telling you what I think that isn't the time to leave.
Right.
I think that if you're in danger, if the other person is actively abusive or in some kind of lost in addiction and will not do anything about it, then you're gonna it's not gonna change.
Right.
But I think it's hard to know when to leave. I think I just was with a couple this morning who they've just fallen into being very parallel, and they're saying sure, and they have kids,
Mm-hmm.
and they're saying, should we get out, should we quit? And I said, what if we really work at this for
Right.
5 months and really see what we can shift? And then if you decide, because here's the deal, this relationship is not ending whether you're married or divorced.
Good point. Because you have kids
Relationship
together.
continues. You
Yeah.
have kids, it continues forever. Let's try to heal the relationship and then see if that is the relationship that you want to be married in. But
Yeah.
let's try to clean up the trouble first and then make the decision.
Well, what's interesting is I think that the thing that differentiates that couple is that they came to you, right? A lot of people, they don't even go to counseling, or like, I'm done with counseling. I'm so done with you, and I don't even want to go with counseling.
Yeah, yeah.
When they're at that point, does it even make sense to go to counseling? I mean, what instances does it make sense to go to counseling, and what instances, like, you're not really going to be able to change that? Or I don't want to seem too pessimistic, but it's going to be more of a challenge to change.
I, there's not a black and white answer. I think that the answer, what I say to people is, try not to leave when you're in the middle of the pain,
Mm.
which is kind of counterintuitive.
Right.
But let's see if we can move through the trouble and then make the decision so you're not in reaction.
Mm.
If we can, I mean, here's the truth: is I've sat with people who had the biggest messes you've ever heard of. It would make a mini series for 15 years.
Right.
Every bad thing you could imagine to go wrong with a couple has happened,
Mm-hmm.
and they have turned around the relationship and found something and built something strong and wonderful. I've sat with couples that had very little wrong. I mean, they both, felt the same about everything and had everything in common and didn't fight, but there was no juice. They
Mm.
couldn't find that connection.
Right.
So there's not a formula.
Right.
But I think that if I go back to what I think makes sense, is that I think the point shouldn't be whether you leave or stay. It should be, can we clean this up, figure out how we got here? Can I find my part of it?
Right.
And then if we leave, we don't carry a bunch of baggage. I
Right.
don't have to do the same relationship again.
Right.
And we have an option to stay because we've learned how to manage the trouble. I don't know. Does that answer your question, or is it?
Yeah, I think actually what you're saying is, how does someone decide? Well, there's one clear answer, which is like, if you're just leaving because of the pain and you don't want to deal with the pain, don't go try to work it out. And I think that it probably varies. If the pain is that someone is an addict or, is in jail or those kind of pains, then maybe it's going to be, you're going to have to judge your physical safety and your whatever kind of safety and decide. If it's just because the sizzle is gone, that's repairable.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it also goes back to how you chose the person.
Yeah.
Because, people fall madly in love with someone on a first date, and 2 months later they've moved to, to Winnemucca, and they've married them. And
Right.
they have no information that this is a person that even has the capacity for the skills to do a long-term relationship.
Yeah.
So that's the whole other part of it, is how do you choose wisely to
Right.
start with?
Yeah. Well, there are tons of stories in your book about people who were choosing, and even the choice oftentimes is in our unconscious process, that we're choosing to heal our own traumas, which was a big aha for me that we were talking about earlier. And so sometimes we choose people to heal ourselves. Yeah. But once we're healed, I think it's time to move on. Like I look back at all the guys that I've broken up with, the couple boyfriends that I had, and I think, yeah, that guy, my first boyfriend was not meant to be my life partner, and I got what I needed out of it. It was time to go. It was painful, but the benefit, the return on the investment, meaning I could spend a lot of time and
Right.
get rid of the pain and work with him to be a couple. I just didn't want to spend the time to do that, and I didn't have faith, like, you're ultimately not the right person for me to be with. And I think that probably falls true with all the 3 or 4 other boyfriends that I had afterwards. Like, I think I got what I needed to learn. I need to move on. But I don't know, maybe do some relationships end in that particular way too, or it's like
I think what's important, though, is that you have as much consciousness that you're not reacting to not being in love or being stuck in a repeating fight.
Right.
That those aren't the reasons, that you're responding to a deeper wisdom in yourself.
I got it.
So, and that's very different than
I'm
so angry at you and I can't stand this anymore, and you're so unfair and I'm out of here.
Yeah.
That's different than I've been sitting with this a long time, and it's not right for me to be with you. We are not meant. I mean, what our marriage was something. People died before they were 30 when this whole business started. Right. They didn't go on until they were 90 years old.
Right.
And so being with someone over a long time is a huge deal.
Yeah.
Who I selected at 20 is not who I selected at 40.
Yeah.
I went back before I married my husband. I was 40 when we got married. I'm 70 now. Mm-hmm. And I went back and found my first boyfriend, who I had remained obsessed with. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I've got to find him before I commit to you, because I knew I wasn't going to get out of it.
Right.
And I went back to find him, and I had stayed frozen at 17.
Yes.
And I still felt the same attraction I had felt when I was 11 years old and fell in love with this boy. But I knew so much more. I thought, oh my gosh, I need to run the other way. There was all the things that were trouble were really bad trouble. Yeah. They didn't have to do with the feeling. They had to do with the fact that he didn't have the skill set for me or anyone else, as it turned out.
I love that story. And here's why I love that story. Because every movie that you see, right, these fictional movies, the person goes back and is like, I still love you, right? I mean, let's be real. How likely is it that, having, 60 years of, or in your case, 30 years of separation, you'd still be like, I still love you, It's like, come on.
Because people, what we're in love with? Is the feeling we had the first time you fall in love. Yeah. It's mind-blowing. Just the oxytocin that gets released in your body.
Yeah, it's like, give me some more of that heroin. I be likey.
Yes, I'm in love with my high school boyfriend or my college sweetheart, because I'm in love with what that feeling was.
Yeah.
And we never got to the place where we made each other nuts and where we really got that it wasn't meant to be. So
Right.
we go back to the feeling, but we think it's them. So that's why people have all these messes about reunions. They
Mm.
run off to their reunion and then they fall in love with someone they're in love with who they were at 16. They don't even know the other person. But so you want to talk about the decision. So you were talking, you
No,
asked.
but I want to go back about the decision. What I wanted to ask you about is you had said, hey, part of it is asking yourself, what is my role? What before, and I got very strongly about what you said is when if you're saying to yourself, I don't want to deal with this anymore, or whatever, I can't deal with it, I'm out of here, like those kind of terms
Yeah,
to me are almost like the first thing that you hear and go,
yeah,
like
yeah.
that's you not wanting to deal with the pain and running
Yes,
away from the
yes,
pain,
yes,
right? So
yes.
that was one thing I took away. And then I want to go back to what I think a really important point that you make in your book, Love Cycles, is you talk about, hey, when you break up, this is like the ultimate, if you were about to heal your if in fact you got into that relationship anyways because you had an unhealed part of your life,
Yes.
then what is the learning? Because if you're going to go through all this pain, you might as well
Learn it with
learn
someone else.
something.
You're going to do it over. I have this sort of repeating nightmare.
Yeah.
It's real life. It happens in this
Mm-hmm.
town that I live in.
Oh, sorry.
And I see, this is what happens. And I've
Mm-hmm.
been doing this 35 years.
Yeah.
One of the things I love about coaching is that I don't know the people that I'm working with. I don't know their stories, but I do here. So here's what happens. I work with a couple and they get into a reaction with each other and they break up. And they're so glad to be out of it. 3 years later, I meet somebody at the grocery store and who says to me, this actually happened, who says to me, oh my gosh, I found the perfect person. We've been together 4 months. It is absolutely the perfect relationship. Well, because I've been here so long, I
Yeah.
happen to know that other person, and I probably worked with them in their marriage. And I know that this person that they have fallen in love with, who's going to change their life, is worse than the person they were with in the
Oh
same
goodness.
way.
Yeah.
And I just had that happen last year with someone who was with a serial cheater,
Yeah. Oh.
and it was really painful and awful.
Yeah.
And then they got out, and they refused to do any work on it, and they didn't. And you know what? They ended up with somebody who I knew was a serial cheater. Again, of course I'm not going to say that
Right.
at the market of choice. Oh no, you don't want to be with that person because they're going to cheat on you.
Right.
I can't say anything.
Right. Yeah.
I
You
can just
can't
say,
do
I'm glad
that.
you're happy. But I know it's all set up to go again because they never did any work around it. They just got out of the relationship and said now everything's better. But how did I end up with someone to do that in the first place?
Okay, so here's the interesting thing. I think that people say you need to work on yourself. You need to go figure out what happened in that relationship. And people are like, I did that. I did think about it. He was a blah, 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 that's why I left. Like I thought about it, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think so people give that advice to people, but I don't think people know what it means to think about how you contributed. I mean, if you were to talk to me and ask me like how did I contribute to, I'll even go to the downfall of one of my boyfriends, my last ex. I mean, what would the questions that you would ask me be so that I could make sure that I got the learnings that I needed to get?
Well, what I would do is I would ask you about your early history
Mm-hmm.
and what you learned growing up about attachment and protest and repair and affection, and I would ask you for your story.
Yep. And I can actually look at my third boyfriend and say, yep,
and how did you select
he
this
was
person?
detached, which was related to my family and how I was raised. He was
detached.
very controlling and manipulative, which was the way that my family raised me.
Okay. And so it was familiar love.
Yes.
It was the territory that you knew, and so if you start getting those connections, you see one of the things that we get confused about is that we culturally, because of the way that we learn about love, there's this idea that the more I'm attracted to somebody, the more perfect the relationship is, and the stronger the attraction, the more it's clear I should be with that person. Sometimes the stronger the attraction, the stronger the message that I should run as fast as I can the other way.
Okay, how so?
Let's say that I grew up with a very angry parent. I am going to be attracted to probably to someone who has issues around anger. Now, this is interesting. For example, I may be attracted to somebody that has no anger. They never get angry. Everything's good. Now, what do you know about people that have no anger?
It's repressed.
It's
Yeah.
repressed, and what happens? One day it blows.
Yeah.
You know, beware people who have no anger because they're sitting on a volcano
Right.
as big as the people who live from an angry place. I've got to have some intelligence about my history, especially if it was a painful kind of history.
Right. So if I break up, I say, what led me in my family history
Yeah.
to get here? And
Yeah.
if I have the answers, like I can say, well, it was because my family manipulated me. You know, as an Asian person, you've got that whole whole tiger parenting thing, and that
Yes,
yes. And so
yes.
there I was in a relationship healing that thing. So that, but how, so there's that knowledge. Now that I know that, then I'm not going to necessarily go, I kind of have like my radar on the next relationship, or how does
You're not going to
knowing
confuse attraction with that you should be with someone. So if you grow up with the tiger parent, then you have a whole story about who you should be.
Yes.
And you know how to dance, dance the tap dance, dance the ballet.
Yeah.
Be what other people expect you to be.
Right.
So you're going to find yourself in a relationship with somebody where you're trying to be what they expect you to be.
Yes.
And resenting it.
Yes.
So if you understand that pattern, you stop doing it. And then you stop, like I grew up with a very depressed father. I was really attracted to depressed men, always. Because I always had this idea I was going to heal him. I was going to make him happy. I was going to do something and be up all the time.
Right.
And so I was an absolute magnet for men who were depressed. I knew how to relate to them. I knew how to be sympathetic. I knew how to, make them laugh.
Right.
And so and I still have that. I mean, I still go into a room and shut my eyes and find the one depressed man in the room and try to save him. I just know that pattern.
Right.
So
but
what I do
being
is
conscious of it is one thing, right? Because then you go, you don't have to save him,
That's right. That's right. And I know how to do all the tricks to make them like me because I can make, I know how to do that dance. Right.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean it's healthy for me.
Right. Yeah. There's certain dances that you don't have to do anymore.
No, like eliminate yourself.
Yeah. Stop the Macarena. If you don't like it, it's not good for you. Stop doing the dance. Okay, so what are the other questions that you would want to ask so that you actually truly get into, I'm squeezing all the juice out of this relationship so that I'm truly learning about myself so I can be better prepared in the next relationship? What other kinds of things?
Well, one thing is we see what our partner does. We look out and if there's trouble, we see the way they look, their nonverbals, what they did that started the fight. It's very hard to look out and see what we're doing.
Right.
To see our part of it.
Right.
None of us would want a video camera on us when we were feeling really defended, and we were feeling very, hurt or in some reaction. What is it that I'm doing that's just as difficult to live with?
Right.
How can I see my part? Not because I'm bad, just because I'm human.
Right.
And so I have to know my part. When I'm, for instance. One of the ways I manage anxiety is I want to connect. I want to go towards and talk about it and connect. I've been since this person at 11, he was remote. I've always been attracted, and my husband's remote. He gets remote, and if he feels distressed, he wants to not talk about it. And so it took me a long time to understand that my urge to talk about it was not because it was the right urge, it was a different urge. And that he has every right, it's just as logical for him to say not now. And for him to want to go for a bike ride is not the wrong move, it's a different move. So so a lot of what I'm talking about is not learning how we're bad or wrong, but how the differences feel that way. So if we have some kind of difficulty, we're fighting about how to wash the dishes, and or something else, and I feel upset about what's gone on, and I go after him. He wants to get away from me and go off and have solitude. And that dance goes on and on and on. Well, it took me a long time to get that my going after him was like an invasion in the same way his pulling away from me felt like abandonment.
Yes.
So finding some empathy for that, for that both of us are just trying to manage our distress.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we've learned how to do that pretty well now. We don't
Right.
torture each other with that,
Right.
but
So if when you break up, you ask yourself, okay, what were the dynamics that were at play, and how did I lead into that? Was my, in your particular case, was it my desire to connect because that's a value that I hold dearly, or was it his desire for privacy and space?
yeah,
And,
yeah.
and it's not as if privacy or connection, one's not better than the other. They're equally important. So if you say, we were just different, that's
Right, and it was
completely
when
different.
anxiety makes everything worse. I
Yeah.
mean, we both need to have solitude and we both need connection. But when I'm anxious, where I go to is I want connection and he wants solitude.
Right.
And so how do we manage that? He's trying to take care of himself, I'm trying to take care of myself. How do we learn to manage that? A lot of the troubles we get into with our partners are not because one person's wrong. It's because people are different, you know. I've worked with couples a lot with illness, and I just had a couple I coached. I did a Skype coaching with for about 4 months, and it was really interesting. Where I'm changing all this around. So
Yeah.
it's, but let's say there was an illness, um, and one person deals with that illness by wanting to learn everything about it and tell the doctors what's going on and what
Right.
they need to do and what the latest research is.
Right.
And usually they're married to somebody who wants to deal with an illness by trusting totally that the people who are handling it know what
Oh,
they're
right.
doing
Yes.
and not making them angry,
Right.
bringing them cookies instead so
Right.
they'll lie
Don't
to
make
them.
the doctor angry like we don't trust them. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and
it's
so
like, no,
they're
I want to
fighting
know.
because one person's making them angry by saying, "Oh no, that's not the latest research,"
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
no doctor wants to be told that when they're
Right.
treating someone. Look what I read on the internet. You're wrong, and so they're fighting about how to do this,
Yeah.
and instead of learning how to support each other in this hard time, they're fighting over the right way, and that's
Yes,
what.
I get it. Yeah. So at the very end, so you end a relationship, you make the decision, you decide to end. If you really, or even if you decide to stay, it's really asking yourself, what made me susceptible to this behavior to begin with? What was I
Yeah.
trying to merge on and heal? That was one thing.
Yes.
And then the second thing is, okay, you're not perfect and the other person isn't perfect either, and both of you are perfect in your own way in some other way. Like you're perfect
Yes.
and you're imperfect.
Yes.
You're perfectly
Yes. Yes.
imperfect. So, you know, ask yourself, how are you different? And instead of judging that person as different and bad, look at the person wholeheartedly and say they're just different. So how do we manage these differences? So if you're going to, relationship number two, it's like, well, this is what I bring into, like, here's what I bring into the relationship. So if I were to do one for me, it'd be like, I'm a control freak. I bring that into the relationship. So I have to, like, work with my controlling tendencies if I'm with someone who's really
Yes.
chill.
Yes.
But you have to know yourself so that when you're in relationship to another person, you can relate better. So those are the kinds
That,
of things to do that.
and to know that often we choose the opposite.
Right.
If you're a control freak, you might be very attracted to somebody who's laid back,
Yes.
and then you get together, and they need a little more being in control, and you need a little more laid back. So you fall in love. It's the perfect match, and then
Yeah.
2 years later, you're going crazy, saying, "Get up off the couch and do something."
Right.
They're saying, "Sit down and let it go." And then now you're trying to make each other
Right.
different, and
Yeah.
now it starts the fight. Why
Yeah.
don't you why are you more in charge of your life? Why do you have to be in charge of everything?
Right.
And that's the next stage. And if we can laugh at that
Yes.
and know that we are going to bring in someone who's really different than us, and we're going to fall in love with the difference, and then we're going to try to change each other
Yes.
and to be like we are, and that's going to be the fight. It's very interesting.
Well, it's so interesting because my husband and I, if you were to say, would you imagine Gideon and CJ to be married? People are like, are you kidding me? They're so opposite. I just
How
can't
are you
even figure out.
opposite?
Yeah, huh?
How are you opposite?
Oh, in almost every way, for the reasons that you talk about. Like, he's an introvert, I'm an extrovert. I say everything out loud to everyone. He's very private. Like, every single way in which you would imagine us, we're completely opposite.
Yeah.
And yet we're attracted to each other. And what's happened over time is he's become more like me and I've become more like him, because what's happened is I've watched him and learned from him and have grown and actually know what it means to be an introvert. You know what I mean? I can kind of embrace
Yes.
those tendencies so that I can I can be whole again, right? Because we were a balance of extroversion and introversion.
Yes.
So
Yes.
he's forced me to kind of look at the merits of being an introvert, and now I'm more introverted than I was before. Or, he's the ultimate diplomat, and I just say whatever is on my mind, right? And
Yes.
he, as a result, has been way more forceful about what he wants and what he wants to say. And I've become more of a diplomat. I mean, in some ways,
Isn't that
those,
great?
yeah, you kind of end up that person could help you fill in the blanks of where you weren't whole, if that makes sense.
Yes, that's why you're still successful. That's why you're still in the relationship because you're learning what the gifts are and
Yeah.
how to make the gifts out of the differences rather
Yes.
than to have it be a war
Yeah.
about who's right or wrong.
Yeah. Okay, I have a whole bunch of other questions that I saw on the internet of people who, so that was how do you know when you break up? And then I think we talked about the other thing is how do you deal with the shock? I've seen the shock happen whether you're getting fired or
If
you're
you're
breaking
breaking
up.
up, how do you deal with the
Yeah,
shock?
because there's the shock, pain, and awe, right? I mean, and I think it's, and I think actually, I think you wrote this or read it in an article that when you're saying the first stage happens, in your book, the love cycles, you talk about the first stage is emerge. And so when you make the decision to separate, that addictive quality is the same as withdrawing from an addiction. I mean,
Yeah.
all the
Yes,
things
it
that you don't
is.
like feeling is like that's exactly
Yeah.
what you feel
Yeah.
during this time, and it feels crappy.
Yeah.
So, what's some advice about how how you remain peaceful? Because I've seen a lot of things on the internet like, should I still go back? Should I still stay with him? Maybe I made a wrong decision. All those kind of thoughts. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think you're going to be peaceful. I think there's a loss in you. When you break up a relationship, you lose a whole history.
Mm-hmm.
Often lose, I mean, people usually break up and they still have some attachment to each other. And it's that there's a grief process. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the things is we have to allow ourselves to be in the grief
Mm-hmm.
and to know that even if the person has done terrible things or is really a jerk, that there's some part that we fell in love with that had a different hope for it,
Mm-hmm.
and that losing that dream is very painful. We've got to let ourselves have time to grieve, and I
Mm-hmm.
and I think we can get stuck in the culture that we should all be happy. That it should, we should just go off and meditate 7 times and drink kale juice and everything will
Right.
be better. But in fact, we've got to let ourselves grieve our losses because otherwise it takes some distorted form. So that's one answer to that. I think another thing is, well, the best way to deal with heartbreak is it's a strange thing. There's a certain amount of time that we have to let ourselves grieve, and
Mm-hmm.
then there's a certain amount of time that we have to push ourselves to get over it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a delicate balance because if we don't do the grief, we bring it into the next relationship. We carry it in some way, it affects us.
How
It
so? Give
stops
me an
our,
example of what that looks like.
well, okay, so if I have a relationship and I call it spiritual bypass.
Right.
Um, and we break up and I don't let myself feel the sorrow of that because I'm off meditating on the rocks and I'm thinking everybody should be joyful and I just have to go to the light.
Right.
In my next relationship, there's a part of me that's not going to show up. I have a barrier to love because I'm still in grief.
Oh,
I've got, and
interesting.
so at some point, so I have to let myself grieve. And if I'm broken up with, I have to let myself have the anger and the outrage and all that comes with it. And then I have to know when it's time to let that go.
That's so
Because
hard though. How do you know? How
yes,
do you know when it's time to let go? And how do you know that you've grieved the appropriate amount?
well, that's a really good question. I think if you have doubts, you should see a therapist. I mean,
Yeah.
really, that some people have a sense of knowing how to grieve, and some people don't. They either can get stuck in it forever, or they don't do it enough. There's not a black and white answer to this,
Mm-hmm.
but I do believe that we have to give the relationship a certain amount of space to say goodbye in our
Mm-hmm.
heart. because that's what frees us. But then people get stuck in that. You know, we've all met people that say, "I'll never love again because when I was 17, my boyfriend left me." You
Right.
know, it's like that's a little, get over it.
Yeah.
But at the same time,
Right.
somebody, we have so much emphasis on happiness, and that we've got to allow our human condition to be a part of who we are
Right.
and not try to bypass it.
Right.
So not telling you, I'm not giving you an answer. I'm giving you another question.
Yeah.
I think it's an important other question.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that it's almost, how do you relate to pain? And if you're willing to go into the pain, experience the pain and the grief and the sadness and the anger, and really feel it in your body, mind, and spirit.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, that's when you've grieved. And how do you know? I don't know. I guess I don't. If someone said to me as a coach, "Well, how do you know?" I'd say, I don't really know when you know. It's a feeling that you have on the inside.
You know it deep down. You know it deep down when you're pushing it away or when it's moving through you. And it's the same way we talked about, how do you know when it's time to leave? I don't think you know because your head knows. I think in your body you know, I'm done.
Yeah.
And I also think that you know when you're not done. Even though everything may say, I'm done, and your friends say, get out, something in your body says, I'm holding on to it. I'm in it. And I think we're very quick to tell people what they should do in their relationships.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody knows what anybody else should do. I sure don't know.
Right.
You know, I know the things we need to do to be healthy, but where that puts us in the decision about whether to stay or not stay, I don't know that. That is something we have to have ways of balancing ourselves so we can really know what the truth is rather than our reaction.
Yeah. But I think one thing, I mean, your main point is you got to feel the emotions. Because
if you feel the sorrow and the loss. It's a loss. Even if you don't like the other person, it's the loss of a dream. It's two people form a culture. They form a culture, and that culture, when they break up, that culture is lost. It's gone.
That's a huge aha for me, because I think that we don't, and you mention it in your book, and I got it, and I just forgot it, and now I got it again, because a friend of mine was divorced, and she said, this was my dream.
Yeah.
Like this was my vision. I was going to be married. I was going to have, 2 kids, or, and we were going to live a happy life. And now I have to let go of the dream. I have to let go of the dream. And I thought, well, I guess the dream with respect to how it was, that dream, yes. I mean, I don't know if you have to let go of the dream generally, but I do think that's a really interesting point. You form a culture and a bond, and there has to be closure.
A story. And that nobody else was there when you met, or when you began, or when you fell in love, or when you had that crazy experience in Albuquerque. It's a whole like a third body of your life that's gone. And so so it's appropriate to grieve it. And even if you're angry at the other person, sometimes that stops you from grieving it. But, like one of the questions you asked, I thought it was so great. Like, how do you break up with someone with kindness? That question really struck me.
Okay.
I think it's a wonderful question.
Okay.
I think when you break up with someone with kindness, so I thought a lot about it.
Yeah.
Is that you have to allow them to be furious at you. You have to allow them to be distraught. You have to know that how they manage it, that kindness gives them room to experience it the way they experience it, rather than kindness means they're not going to care or it's not going to hurt them. I think it's devastating to end a relationship most of the time, even if we don't like the person or we've run out of juice. I think it's the end of something, and that's very painful.
Right.
And so breaking up with kindness means I have to give you lots of room to hate me, or to be angry, or to say it's not fair, or to say, will you try, and to be willing to say, I'm not, one of the ways to break up with kindness is to not be involved with someone else, because that's the worst. I can tell when I see people and that one person says, I feel like I'm done. If there's somebody else in the picture, They're done because how do you turn away from the merge where everything is perfect?
Yes.
When you've been in a relationship where everything's gotten to imperfect, you can't give it a try. You can't give
Right.
it a chance.
Yeah, it's
So
over because they're like already on a heroin addicted world. It's
they're
going to be
off in the
hard for you to
drugs. They're
compete.
off
Yeah.
on the oxytocin,
Yeah.
That dopamine is going wham, wham,
Yeah.
wham,
Yeah.
and the other person is perfect. So part of the kindness is you don't you don't mess around outside of the relationship until you close it
I
down.
know. I know. It's sad because oftentimes when people cheat, I think they just couldn't gracefully get out of it and have the hard conversation. So cheating is a way for them not to deal with it because they
Yes.
know that their partner will be like, "We're done now, right? You've cheated
Yes.
on me and you're done."
Yes.
And they just don't want to deal with it. So they
Yes.
just cheat because they don't really know how to talk about.
Yeah, because they don't want their pain. They don't want the pain for themselves.
Yeah.
So to be kind is to give it a fair goodbye
Yeah.
and to find some way to grieve together.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was one of the answers that those were two answers that came up.
I love this. Thank you so much for being here. That was the fastest 50 minutes on Earth. That
It
was
was great, wasn't it?
it was
You're
really
wonderful
great.
to talk to.
You are too. These are just such wonderful answers, and I really love this book. We're talking to Linda Carroll, and we're talking about her book, Love Cycles, the 5 Essential Stages of Lasting Love. I want you to come back and talk about wholehearted loving, and then talk about some of these. There's probably like 15 questions that I didn't have a chance to ask.
Let's do it. I'd love to do it.
Okay. It means so much to me that you're listening to the show. I would love your support in any way by giving me comments below or to subscribe to the show or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.